Hi, I'm Bruce from Jericho, Vermont, and I support Adoptees On because I have found that connecting with other adopted people in a safe, supportive, and nourishing space has been essential to my healing and well-being. The voices of this community have enabled me to find my own voice and stand in my own truth. Please join me in supporting this life-changing podcast so we can help more adoptees around the world to know that they are not alone.
You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is episode 196, Jack. I'm your host, Haley Radke. Today, I welcome Jack Dermody to the podcast. We talk about family secrets in adoption and the impact it has on all the parties when they are revealed. Jack also gets personal and tells us what happens when you start closely examining your adoptee experience in your 70s. We also talk about family preservation and adoptee support through the lens of community showing up for each other. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Jack Dermody. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, Haley.
So glad to talk with you today. I'd love it if you would share some of your story with us.
Well, one of the biggest parts of my story are family secrets that end up being very, very cruel in the short term and in the long run. And throughout one's life, I'm just recently turned 76 years old and only beginning to understand the power of those secrets and how long it's taken to overcome their impact on me. Maybe a best way to talk about it is that my sister was adopted also. We were both told very early in life that we were adopted. But my sister, when I found my birth mother, said something very surprising. I called my sister and I say, "Hey, you got to sit down. I found my birth mother and I got to tell you all about it." And she says, "Well, you got to sit down because I found my birth mother too." I said, "You got to be kidding." She says, "Okay, well, you go first. Who was your birth mother?" And she said, Dad's sister was the birth mother. And I did have to sit down after that because my sister, all her entire life, the story she was told, is that she was the daughter of drop-down drunks and that Mom would do everything possible throughout her entire youth to keep her from even having a sip of alcohol. And this story was repeated again and again and again throughout her entire life. And Mom was quite narcissistic and not a little cruel. And so it's amazing my sister came out of that halfway sane at all in the end. But that was one of many, many, many secrets. And one of the saddest things about growing up with a family with secrets is that you miss out on even your adoptive people, never mind your biological people. When my sister found this out and when I found my birth parents, everybody who could have added to these stories or had a conversation were as dead as you can be. And even many of their descendants were missing and unavailable with enough information for all the questions we had. So growing up, I have to say, however fog can be described for adoptees, I certainly had, because I was always trying to find myself to see where I fit in. And the most I felt possibly fitting in was with my dad. My adoptive dad was my hero. He was absolutely amazing. He was a man's man. He was very good at sports. He was good to his friends. He was a good conversationalist. He was a great joke teller. He was very successful in business. He was true to his wife like nobody on earth. He was an honest man. He was respected in the community. That's the good side. The dark side is I wasn't led into that, not led into the business, not accompanied by my father all that much because he let Mom raise me absolutely, completely. I was essentially a prisoner of my mother. But I got to see another world just by watching my father. I got to see there was a cool world. There was a strong world. There was a lot of good males out there to model myself after, even though I couldn't really be very much part of it. Which is why when alongside of doing my search for my birth parents, I went digging into the ancestry of my father's my adoptive father's family very deeply, because he had really cool sisters, very well educated sisters. Yeah, they're Irish. They had a lot of alcohol and so on. Well, so what? They're Irish. Anyway, they because they lived so far away, I got to miss out on all that. But the research that went to the ancestors into their life was satisfying enough that it almost made up for a lot of the secrets that were kept.
Well, can I pause you, because you sent me a photo for your headshot, and it's you as a young child. And so I'm curious why that's important to you. And when you're thinking about genealogy and your history, why that?
That's a happy and sad story at the same time. Both my adoptive father and my bio father were great athletes, really good athletes. Matter of fact, when I visited the high school of my birth father, where in the late 30s he was attending, he in brass had his name all over the walls as champion of everything and captain of every sport they could possibly have. So I must have been a huge disappointment to my adoptive mother, because I know she purchased the pedigree, because the pedigree, as far as she was concerned, was I was the grandson of a cardiac surgeon. I was the son of a medical student, and both were naval officers, and I was the son of a naval nurse, and these people were all strong and hardy and intelligent, and therefore I must be also. So anyway, the little me in a baseball uniform is the one sport I didn't completely screw up as a child, and enjoyed it. But I wished I had had it much earlier in Little League and had parents who supported that to a much larger degree. No, I would never have been a great athlete of any kind. I turned out to be much more like my birth uncle, my bio uncle, who was a writer, a very successful writer. He wrote for magazines. He was an editor for Time Life. He wrote a couple of novels. That's the DNA that landed in my system, and just a little bit of physical work. The only thing I do physically is walk and ride a bicycle to this day. So it just it was my one little touch as a child to athletics.
So when you look back now, you said you've really only, I don't know if this is before we were recording or not, but you'd really only been unpacking, maybe like the unfogging, like in the last 6 months.
Yes.
And so when you look back on your searches and looking, for what, what were you looking for genetic connection, for filling out those blanks of your paperwork? What led you to that? And now looking back with these new lenses, what do you see differently?
Well, the bottom line and the end of that story is, in the last 6 months, that fog has disappeared, and I'm seeing my adoptive parents very, very objectively. And to give you a good insight about that, my wife and I have been paying for a plot to be buried near all of them for many years now. And I just told my children that my wife and I have decided we don't want to be buried there. Please give that to somebody else. We'll just be cremated and go in a totally different direction. Now, how's that for a bottom line?
Okay.
Okay, so the search was just amazing. The search was old school, 20 years of going to the county recorder in California.
Did you say 20 years?
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. This was many years ago. This was like in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Using Alma and every other type of organization to try to find people, and just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I even had a girlfriend who was a private detective who got close, but not completely there to find my birth parents. So finally, there was an episode of unsolved mysteries. And in this episode, some baby was abandoned in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. And somehow they helped authorities find the actual birth parents of this baby. And they were located here in Arizona, in Scottsdale. They were called Orphan Voyage. So I gave them a call. And lo and behold, they gave me the name of a woman in California. Phone number, $350. In 10 minutes, I had the information on both of my birth parents. Bada bing, bada boom. There you go. I don't know who paid off whom or what exactly happened, but there they were. And the birth parents after that were very easy to find. My birth mother's last name was very unusual in a state in the Midwest, so found her people in a matter of hours. And 6 months later, we met and had a wonderful reunion in Reno, Nevada. Birth father would never deal with me. Back in the documents that described your background, it said the guy was a jerk and he ran away and his own father was not proud of him. And he compartmentalized that his entire life. As successful and wonderful as he was, and even the fact he had 2 girls and didn't have a son of his own at all with the next wife, I just can't imagine why he wouldn't want to meet me, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, it never happened.
I'm sorry.
So my birth mother was a gem. She was a real jewel. Ironically or interestingly, she said that just a few years before, I was already 50 and she was 70-something at the time. She wouldn't have been open to this. It would have been very difficult, but for some magical reason, she just leaped at it, and we met. So I brought my 11-year-old daughter with me, and she brought her husband, and we just had a wonderful reunion. Oh, you got to hear this. She wanted me to take off my shoe when we got in the hotel room, and we compared our large toe, and my toe curled up just like hers did. And she says, that was my last memory of you. My last memory of you before I had to relinquish you is your toe. And there they were. That was something.
That gives me all the feels. Mm-hmm. That gives me all the feels, Jack. Wow. So reunion, so that was like 25, 26 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now looking back on that, what is that like for you? I noticed that you said there's weirdness in one of the emails that we sent back and forth before our recording. Not necessarily with her, but weirdness in biofamily stuff.
Oh, one of the things I'm sure you're well aware of is the reactions that all of us adoptees have to how we're received or not received by our biological people, and how we ourselves feel about meeting these people. Some people, they must expect, some sort of good reception or a little bit of love or glad tidings, the arrival of the prodigal son, or some sort of kumbaya moment, when there are these reunions. But boy, oh boy, my experience is that there are a few that you hug and hug you back. And in this case, the biggest one was my own birth mother. And then my birth father's daughter. Well, I'll tell you that story real quick in a minute. But then a few of the others. And so a few that allow you to have conversations with them and so forth. But generally, there's a mass of people out there that you're related to that may as well be strangers you'd see at Disneyland or somewhere. There's just no way you can get close. You've certainly messed up their view of how the world's supposed to be organized. And then you yourself as an adoptee are sort of overwhelmed with all these people. I mean, how close do you want to get to them, and is it worthwhile? Because boy, you didn't share experiences, you didn't share geography, you didn't share education, you didn't share culture or music or anything else. You're glad they're all there, And if you're at all good looking, you're glad for the having, given you some of your good looks. Whatever. So yeah, well, let me get back to my sister, my half sister. And by the way, my birth mother had 5 more boys. How about them apples? And so there were 5 half brothers, and so from the birth father's family, I call them sort of like turtles. They're very private, even on Facebook and everywhere else. It's very hard to connect with them, but they're very, very interesting and wonderful family. My secret is I know more about their ancestry than any of them ever did. So
yeah.
But anyway,
I think that's true for a lot of adopted folks that get into genealogy. Right? We're so trying to reclaim our legacy that you're doing all this research and things, and because they have it already. It's like, oh, it's not that important.
Yeah, I know. and I don't know any of the people not to like them, you see. So I create my own little myths about my ancestors, all these great blacksmiths and whoever else they were, and the fact that all the Welshmen married Germans, that's interesting, and so on. Anyway, my half sister, the way this happened is I had sent this big packet, like most of us do, to my birth father's residence, the address I knew of. Nothing happened for the longest time. It might have been 6 months or so. And I get this email that says, "Hello, I think you might be my brother." Period. That's all the email said. Oh my God. So we communicate, and it turns out that packet was in an apartment in its last days of its lease in somewhere in Pennsylvania that the birth father and family had lived in, and since they had moved to Florida or someplace. And the sister was just picking up the remainder of the mail, and there it was. And she opened it, and it took herself many months to even process the idea. And she contacted me, and we've been as close as a brother and sister could possibly ever be. She's just a real sweetheart, and through her, I toured the house my birth father grew up in, every inch of it. Yes, and got to all of the places that were important in that person's life. Next, let me tell you another thing. I mean, people tell you not to cry over what you missed and how things could have been and so on and so forth. But I have to tell you, my birth father and his brother went to a private school in their neighborhood, which today is one of the nation's better schools, all the way from kindergarten through, high school. And that probably would have been the place I'd gone to. And it's the kind of place run by friends, descendants of Quakers. Wonderful, wonderful, well-rounded education. Everything from the sciences to the arts, and very personal attention, and a long tradition, and which might be hugely responsible for the fact that both the birth father and his brother were quite well placed in society and success in their careers and so on. But anyway, that's one of those. Okay, I wish it had been different. Wish I had my own parents to take care of me throughout all this. Maybe I would have had a little better education.
What I'm just, I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on this thing where you keep saying the birth father instead of my birth father. And is that connected to like him never wanting to meet you? And then you have this beautiful relationship with your sister from him. Yeah. Did you notice that?
No, but you claim in all of your episodes you're not a therapist, but you nailed that one.
I'm definitely not a therapist.
No, but I didn't realize I was doing that myself. But you know what? My view for so many of these guys are, and as a guy, so you got to believe me, this is true, that essentially this was a sperm provider. As far as I was concerned. I'm sure that's how I was in his head. Although I'm guessing, though, that there were other forces around him that didn't allow him to pursue meeting me. I can't imagine a father a man doesn't have a son among his other children, not wanting to see his son, but it could have messed up a marriage. It could have, who knows what it would have done if he had pursued it. I don't know. So I'm trying to be understanding, but I for sure, I know the guy must have compartmentalized me into an object rather than me.
Well, I've noticed this theme with adoptees who are doing that thing that you just mentioned, looking back, oh, what could have been different, those kinds of things. But now from your standpoint, unpacking things, coming out of the fog, so to speak, in the last few months, are there things that you wish you would have done different? And not to be like, oh gosh, I wish I would have done this different, but to lead the way for fellow adoptees now who are experiencing some of those same things that you did when you were in your 50s. Can you give a little advice, perhaps, or just thoughts you have on that?
Boy, oh boy, I've started so many books and never finished them on the memoir type, and one being a science fiction book of time traveling back to me when I'm 8 years old and me when I'm 11 and so on, and giving advice to that child. And our nature has a lot to do with the decisions we make, no matter who's raising us. So I always wonder if I would have been ever, under any circumstances, been brave enough to confront people and say what I really wanted, or ask for real help, or been able to articulate what was bothering me. But in my case, I know I was always given a carrot on a stick, where I almost never got the carrot, and I certainly didn't get the support. And that is why I'm always dwelling on child trauma generally, not just for us adoptees, that the parenting has a lot to do with whether or not you feel you can be the full self that you can be. I've heard those words all my life, be the person you can be, and use all these sayings and change your mind and stuff. But I've had all that. I've done all that. I followed all the gurus and everything else, but I've always stopped short. I've always stopped short, whether it's fear of rejection, whether it's fear of success itself, whether it's not feeling that I have the right, that I obviously come from the unwashed of the world. I don't deserve to be in a position of power, in a position of wealth, so on and so forth. But now, after making these recent discoveries, I'm already doing things twice as well as I did even a few months ago, just because I feel released. I feel I'm beginning to see who the real me is. So what is the answer to your question about giving advice to other adoptees? I would say demand the truth, or there's a certain age where you're not even aware that you should do that. It's probably the beginning in teenage years, in your early 20s or something, because essentially as children, we are prisoners of our environment. We are complete prisoners. We're following whatever rules and whatever culture is surrounding us, and which is why later when we talk about village life, it takes a village for children, is who is there to be your wise person to help you? Who is the person to counter a crazy parent or an unintelligent parent? Or who is there to realize your potential and advocate for you in many areas? Who is there to inspire you? Who is educated? Who is a really spiritual person? Who is a fun person? You put all that together, and it might open you up a lot sooner than you would have. But as long as you're in the fog, as long as you're being told lies, as long as you don't have a real identity, I'm just going to use it, you're screwed, for many years in your life. And it takes something to break you away from it. And I'm sorry it took me to age 75 to hear 198 of Haley Radke's podcasts, but I have to tell you, it's like, you're kidding me. but it feels good. It feels good, and it feels wonderful. So I don't know if I answered your question. I just hope some of these ideas were helpful.
I think they are, because I think there's this fear, right, that on the other side of demanding your truth and that's going to be painful as well. And I don't know, there's something really empowering about you saying, I'm beginning to see who the real me is. And knowing that, I probably will be a different person 10 years from now. And, there's this constant unpacking. I really think that over our whole lifetime, there's, this constant unpacking, unraveling, who am I and who am I going to be in this world? And, the other thing, when you were just talking about that, Jack, I am just such a stickler for family preservation. And when you were saying, be the village and who is around this child, the adopted child, I'm also picturing like, oh, am I showing up for those people in my life right now, for those younger people, and, being an example to them of like, what does it look like to live as the true you and to know your full history, even if it's got painful things, being an example in that way. I think that's a really amazing call to action. You've certainly tweaked something there for me that I'll be thinking about for a long time.
On that thing, my first wife was Indonesian, and met her in Indonesia. I was there teaching English as a second language in a couple of universities. And she came from, even though we were in the big city on an island, she was part of a village because her own parents, her birth parents, had divorced, but they were more or less across the street, different houses with new spouses. And the aunt was raising her and her husband. And whoever in the family, if you have 10 groups in the family, they would tend to live with who had the most money. So, but that was part of the culture. They have a group think in that culture. And that's people are, they think less of themselves and more about how they fit in the family and how they can help each other. And in that culture too, you have, like I was speaking about earlier, there's somebody who's musical, there's somebody who's educated, there's somebody who's the imam at the mosque. It's really a very colorful, very interesting kind of thing. Whereas we in the West, we're so darn individualistic that we come up with something called a babysitter or something called a nanny or tutors that we pay. There's not a lot that feels natural about it because we were tying dollars to the raising of children and so on.
Well, as we kind of start to wrap up and go towards recommended resources, I'm curious if you have something, looking back on younger Jack, do you have something that you are just the most proud of?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I have. What's really interesting is that I grew up in a world that they let me know I didn't fit in, whether subtly or directly. I wasn't going to be in business. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I wasn't going to be a doctor and all that good stuff. And the only thing that looked fascinated, that had some sort of humaneness and humanity to it when I was really young, was religion. I even went into a seminary for a while, but that didn't last too long. I decided I liked girls. But what I got out of that was, it was a very, very good schooling, and I found community that way. And I found community in the Peace Corps. I found myself in the arts and the humanities. I was writing, I was teaching, I was counseling. There are things that priests do, but in the secular world. And so I'm very proud of my work in education and in training and so on. So yeah, there's an element of me that got to express itself through those things, still not knowing who the heck I was and that I deserved only to be in certain places and not in others. That hung in there like forever. But I've had a pretty interesting career.
And you've mentioned a couple of times the importance of music in your life. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, two things, Haley. One is I realize I'm not very good at music, but I just assume that somewhere, I'm sure many adoptees do this, like the movie August Rush, there obviously somebody plays music and I'm going to find them. And it turns out that almost nowhere in the family are there any musicians on either side. Matter of fact, don't you dare sing, please, not again, don't sing. Even Happy Birthday, don't sing that. But I did. I tried to master some keyboard instruments, and I even got to the point where I entertained in German Oktoberfests and stuff like that. But I was never great. But what it was therapy for me. It was an avenue I could go in, and my mother would stop talking and would leave me alone. So I would sit there and practice hour after hour growing up. So it was therapy for me. But so music, yes, music is dear and dear to my heart and my soul. The other thing is writing. Writing was, didn't realize how much that was therapy. I've been writing letters and articles and God knows what all my life. I get great therapy from putting my fingers on keyboards and expressing myself that way. And a really interesting thing, just we're talking about me finding myself now. There's so many unfinished things and so much semi-mediocre work. And I don't know, all of a sudden, this is getting better at this age. I mean, my mind's supposed to be deteriorating, but it feels much clearer now. And when I'm choosing my words and finessing, and I'm kind of surprising myself. So there you go.
I love that. Well, let's do our recommended resources. Since you talked about writing, would you share a little bit about what Tree of Strangers has meant to you by Barbara Sumner? Listen,
Barbara Sumner has written Catcher in the Rye for adoptees. Well, first of all, it's tightly written. It's literary. It's poetry. The design of the novel, the movement from one scene to another, is both my wife and I sat down and read it separately. Neither one of us could leave our seats till we were finished with it. And the book is full of surprises, about her parents, about in the contrast to that, to her upbringing, and in contrast all of that to the amazing life that she blossomed into once she had freed herself from the prison she had been raised in. And I probably have about half that book I have in common with her, and I just leapt with joy reading that book.
I love in her acknowledgments, she writes, "To all of us affected by forced, secret, stranger adoption, may we all find home." And I think as she writes, that comes out, like it so comes out. Mm-hmm. She's been on the show now, and we did book club with her. You were there for that. It was so, so good. So thank you for wanting to mention that. But is there anything else that you want to recommend to us?
Well, I talked earlier about Village. Now, I'm not a big fan of It Takes a Village, but do you know that if you look up It Takes a Village in Google and you try to find people who've written about the subject of creating a village around a child, there's not a lot. And there's so much childhood trauma that could be resolved by thinking before a marriage, or any time actually, but certainly before a marriage, if possible. All right, somebody might get sick. Somebody might die. More than half the marriages end up in divorce. What kind of village can we be setting up for our children? In many of the ways I described earlier, I don't want to take any more time. But I read through it, and even though a lot of her solutions were, Hillary Clinton's solutions were government-based, and actually her view of adoption was pretty primitive.
Warning.
It's a good place to start, just to get yourself thinking about how much better we can start treating children.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And for me, you hinted at this. I feel like you're so right. We don't have a ton of men sharing about their adoptee experiences in the community. So I thought this was a really great spot to recommend this. So I don't know if you are familiar with Brian Stanton at all, Jack, but he wrote a one-man show called Blank that I saw a number of years ago. He performs it at a lot of different adoption conferences. He's shown it. It's really a remarkable, he's a fabulous actor as well, but it's a one-man show and he plays all the different characters. And so we've talked about his play blank before, and he actually has been on the podcast before. But he has a brand new piece that's called At Ghost Kingdom, like the at symbol. But if you look for his website, it's, type it out, At Ghost Kingdom. And he, again, wrote this show as a one-man play. But because of COVID, they decided to film it. So I recently got to watch a screening of it, and there's going to be more available. So I'll link in the show notes where you can find a list of the new screenings. But as a fellow male adoptee, he is showing the process of search, and it's in 5 acts. And the first one is literally him at his computer, and it's actual quotes from his emails, voicemails, texts, Facebook messages as he was searching to find out who his biological father was. And it is so relatable if you are on a search and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I word this? What do I write in this letter to not scare them? And hopefully they'll give me some info. And it's very, very relatable. And the whole thing, it's just like, oh, is this my father? No, this is not. And it's so well done. It's like just really amazing. I'm so thankful for folks like that, folks like you who are willing to talk about the hard things, to tell it like it really is. Because I really feel like it helps adoptees who don't know yet and haven't got any other adoptees in their life to kind of come alongside them. So I just want to read the little description of Ghost Kingdom to see if you would be interested in watching the screening. I really recommend it. But here, this is from one of his little descriptions of what it's about. A dead cop, a federal inmate, and a summertime boyfriend embody the fantasies that haunt an adoptee as he embarks on a virtual journey to unearth his paternal roots. Social media messages and online relationships come to life as he yearns to humanize his phantom father and connect with his ancestral ghosts. So it is top notch at Ghost Kingdom. Highly recommend. I hope that you get a chance to watch it.
You got it. I'm on board.
Okay. You got Jack's stamp of approval. I'm so glad you could share with us today. And there are so many things in your story I was like really hoping we would get to. But if people have questions for you or want to connect with you, where can we do that online?
Well, I'm at Facebook, Jack Dermody. There's a couple others on Facebook, but you'll recognize me just by my age.
All right. So is it okay if folks send you a message on Messenger there?
Yeah, that would be an ideal thing. Yes, please.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm so glad for you sharing your wisdom with us. And I'm really honored that Adoptees On has had some small part in your journey of looking at things in a different way.
Oh, you've made a huge difference, Haley. Thank you very, very much. I'm sure I'm not alone in the gratitude I have for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. I am so honored to serve adoptees of all ages, and even characterizing this episode with some of the notes and things I made about Jack being in his 70s, I feel does a disservice. And I kind of framed it that way so that, folks who are older will hopefully feel connected to some of the things Jack shared. But truly, is the adoptee experience just universal? If we're examining these things in our 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s or and beyond, it's interesting, right? Looking back on your life with a different lens, I think is so empowering, and it is a way of identity reclamation. So I'm thankful for Jack and that he was willing to share those things with us. And even though I bring up a couple times his age, it's so much more than that. And it's really adoptee connectedness. I really feel like that's so important. So I'm thankful for Jack. I'm thankful for my other patrons who keep the show going and support it with their money and time and sharing the episodes with other adoptees. Adoptees On has become like a really popular podcast, which is wonderful. And with that, sometimes there's an assumption that, oh, everyone's heard of Adoptees On, but I promise you they haven't. I promise you, you know an adopted person in your life that hasn't heard about Adoptees On. So if you are able to share this episode or another one that's really meaningful to you with just one adoptee, that is such a gift to me. Truly, it's huge to be able to support other adoptees in that way and build community. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it so much. And I see you when you tag me on socials and you're sharing the show. And thank you so, so much. I can't respond every time, but I do see most of them, depending on my notifications, which honestly are kind of messed up. So I see almost all of them. I also want to just mention that we are still in November, which can be a really hard month if you're listening at the time we've released this. And we have just sort of a self-care hashtag Dear Adoptees thing going on over on social, especially on Instagram. So if you see one of those posts, you can like it and know that we've thought of you, or you can share it if you'd like. You can use it as an opportunity to share your thoughts towards other adoptees and what you would like to say to them. And yeah, I'd invite you to join that. So you can follow at Adoptees on Instagram, or just search Adoptees On in your favorite social app, or look in the show notes for links. And you can also follow at Dear Adoption. My friend Reshma runs that, and you will see some new things coming up there very soon. And I'm so pleased to be able to build adoptee community in this way. So hashtag Dear Adoptees if you want to write a letter to your fellow adoptees and just saying, I'm here if you need someone to talk to, or just know you're not alone. That's sort of the meaning behind that. All right. Speaking of, thanks for listening. Appreciate you so much. And let's talk again next Friday.